Hello, all. I am going to talk about Simson's equivalency theory and how it relates to a K-12 development of his theory and how it can affect the implementation of distance learning. I think his theory states that it's equivalent, but it's not necessarily identical. And I think that's when we have to be careful of distance learning for children. Children learn differently in many different ways, and some do not necessarily learn in an identical way, but they should be able to learn in a way that is equivalent. And just as technology comes into play, a student may learn easier if they have a visual way of learning. And so I think it's really important that we take into account his theory and this quote from Simsonson says that instructional design procedures should attempt to anticipate and provide the collection of experiences that will be most suitable for each student or group of students. And so I think that it is very important that you understand that we have to look as a whole. So we have to look at the students as a whole and try to implement it as best we can to accommodate groups of students, and not necessarily, and understand that they learn differently. And I think if we can understand that during our implementation, then it makes it less scary as far as implementing it goes. So, for example, a lot of schools and districts get nervous about implementing distance learning because of the technology needed and the work that's going to go into creating new curriculum. And so I think if we just look at it as an innovative way of learning, then we can look at it again, as Simmons does, as an equivalent way of learning and not an identical way of learning. Then we can implement this distance learning much easier, and there won't be as much pressure on teachers and students to understand it. So that's what's really important here, is just making sure that it is a new way of learning and an effective way of learning. It's not necessarily identical to traditional way of learning, but it's equivalent.